I'm going to hand off now and step away. The people here are actually to see. I'm going to hand off to Rory Power, our wonderful, amazing author, who is going to. I got a sneak peek at the questions, so I'm very excited for this chat myself. And then to Natalia Theodoridou, who is our guest author. I want to welcome you both to the Virtual Writer Center, and I'm excited now to mute myself and become an audience member. So thank you so much for being here, and enjoy.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And Natalia, thank you so much for chatting. I know we're all really excited to hear more about Sour Cherry and to hear a reading from the book as well. So I thought we could start with that. But before we hear from the book itself, maybe you could just do like a quick introduction and then we can hear a reading.
Yeah, sure. Hello. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. It's great to have you as a conversation partner. And thank you to the Writer Center for having us and to everyone who's here. Natalia Theodoridou, nobody can say my name, it's fine. I'm originally from Greece. I live in the UK, where it is currently midnight. And I'm a short story writer, game writer, recently a novelist. Sour Cherry came out on Tuesday with Teen House. It's a Bluebeard retelling about toxic masculinity, domestic violence, cycles of abuse, all that very cheerful stuff. And yeah, I'm gonna do a bit of a 5-minute reading from the book. I'm going to read from the middle of the book. We have followed the Bluebeard figure from his childhood, which is very strange because he causes all kinds of plagues and disasters, to his first wife and then his second wife, which is what I'm going to read. After his first wife was gone, the man was alone for a while, with his bleeding hand, the walls of the house slowly spoiling from within. Black patches cropped up on the stone, and red veins spiderwebbed across the floor. For the first time in his life, he wrote letters to his first wife, to his mother, to his dead son. Who will love me now? He asked them. Who will love me again? He did not intend to send any of them, so he went out into the garden. He uprooted a white flower and, after moments of thought, buried them in the wet soil. A few months later, he took a new wife. She was small and young, her mouth red, her eyes an ashy gray. He thought she barely looked human, and this endeared her to him. Their marital life went by sweetly. He had told his wife she was free to roam the house, to go into any room she liked and rearrange the furniture as she pleased, to sell his old things and buy new ones, but she was not to disturb his cabinet of curiosities. The little bride was content with this arrangement, though she had no interest in roaming or buying or redecorating. It was not an easy house to love, but with time she learned to ignore the mold that stained the walls, the fetid smell that oozed from the floorboards. The couple had cook to look after them. What was her name? She never asked. But his young bride liked to take over the kitchen sometimes, then come up to his bedroom with a tray of food that she set on the bed and urged him to eat. When he complained that it was the middle of the night, she laughed with her hand in front of her small mouth and said she'd lost track of time. She expected to be with child immediately. She was ready for her body to swell and bloom, her organs taken hostage by a new beast. She lay with him eagerly, her body opening up like a flower, and all the while she thought, irrationally, of cherry trees. She liked to listen to his heartbeat inside his chest. He turned her away sometimes, taken by one of his dark moods that made his hair look blue. But she still found her way to his room at night, crawled into his arms and coaxed him until he kissed her mouth deeply, until there was nothing in the world but the warmth of him, the fullness of her. In the mornings, she thought of the children she would bear, the shapes of their bodies, the color of their hair, the smell of their skin. Yet her blood kept coming every month. It stained her white nightdress and left her with a hollow feeling, as if this child were something she used to have that was taken away. Her skin paled, her hair thinned, and she fell ill with a sadness too vast for words. Her husband filled her room with pretty gifts, flowers and jewels and dresses, but she only ever asked for one thing, a child, a child, a child. One day he grew angry, met her requests with a fury she hadn't seen in him before. Never a child, he told her, his eye cold and sharp. She tightened her grip on the bed covers. She so rarely left the bed these days, and held her breath. Something melted in him then, and his face softened. "I'm sorry," he said. "Aren't we happy, my love? A child will bring you nothing but grief." Was he right? She imagined tiny fingers and little feet, something that loves without question, beyond words. The thought of not being a mother was madness. Her body was transforming day by day in all the wrong ways. Her legs were like water, her arms like glass, her skin like sand, her hair like thread. How could he be right? Slowly, the new wife became obsessed with the mold and the house's smells, the ruinous exhalations of the earth. "It's the house," she told him. "The house makes me ill. It won't let me have a child." He looked at her darkly, something working behind his eyes. She could leave this place, he told her, if she wanted to, for her health. There was a cottage nearby she could inhabit instead. It wasn't far, she could live there. His eyes were sad when he said this, and she cupped his rough cheek. "But husband, how could I live without you?" Nobody could say he didn't try. The wife took to exploring the house, looking for the source of the noxious vapors that made her body inhospitable to young life. She thought it might be something in the wall. She opened any door she could find, walked sniffing through room after room, made herself sick with dust. The walls groaned, the floorboards creaked, the windows shuddered, as if the house had finally entered into a dialogue with her, a strange architectural duet. When she closed her eyes, she saw the house's insides like a map, a labyrinth of rooms, corridors that didn't connect to anything, blind windows that opened into hallways without doors. She was peeling away the wallpaper, ready to tear down the walls, when he took her small hands in his and forced her to sit on the floor, where he joined her to explain why there could never be any more children. After he told her the story, the whole story, from the first plague to his son's death, to his first wife's departure and the dresses he kept, she didn't go looking any longer. She thought, perhaps, dresses were not all he kept. She tried to leave, but the house was too vast, its rooms too complicated to find her way out. After his second wife passed, he could not bear to go near the room in which she died. He bricked up the doorway, then built another room for himself, a new room, with a brand new bed, never touched by his ill-fated bride. And then he asked, "Who will love me next?" Yeah.
Thank you so much for that reading. I thought it was wonderful. I'm so glad to be talking to you. I loved this book so much. I sometimes I'll do a thing where if I see some prose I really like, I'll take a screenshot of it and send it to like all of my friends and be like, "Read this sentence. It goes so hard. It's so good." And I did that with like 5 or 6 different pages of Sour Cherry. I also today was in a bookstore and the bookseller tried to hand sell it to me, and I was like, "No, I'm good." Like, I mean, I agree, it's wonderful, but like I'm on the wavelength already. So I thought we would start kind of with the beginning in a sense. This is your debut novel. And you've written, as you said in your introduction, you've written short fiction before and like interactive fiction, games, that kind of thing. But this is such a different form with different challenges and things that are easier maybe in a novel. So I'm curious about what it was like for you moving from form to form, and did it require you to change your process at all, or what was that like for you?
Yeah, it was very unexpected for me to write a novel, because for the longest time I used to say I'm strictly a short story writer. I've been writing short stories since I was a child, and in English since 2012, I think maybe. And I always had a lot of ideas. But how it worked for me was the story would gestate in my head for a long time, and then it would, when I was ready to write, it would emerge like fully formed, and I would do minimal editing. It would be 90-80% there. Writing was definitely not rewriting for me. If I did try to move things around, most of the time it just collapsed, or I lost something, like some resonance that I found in the story without actually meaning to put it there. It was just there. So I thought I can't revise, I can't edit. And then when I tried to write a novel, I discovered there is so much room in there. You can move things around so freely. And rewriting was how I figured out what the novel was about. So, and then I loved that. I found that so liberating. And even I haven't written a short story since January
Oh,
last
wow.
year, which is shocking to me and a little
Yeah.
bit terrifying. Like who even am I? But I do find that most of my ideas now just lend themselves to longer form work. And yeah, I'm fine with that. I love rewriting now, and I love revision.
Was this idea immediately a novel to you? Could you tell, or was there a phase where you thought maybe shorter, or maybe like bits of it were different things?
Yeah, there is an origin story there.
Yeah.
So no, it was not. It's based on a short story I wrote. It was in 2018. I was at the Claren West Writers Workshop, which was at the time a 6-week residential workshop. There were 18 of us. We had a different instructor every week, and we each wrote a different story every week and critiqued everybody else's work. It was intense and amazing, and I made some of my best friends there. Some of them are in this room, I think. So I wrote a story. I knew I wanted to write a Bluebeard retelling to talk about domestic violence. So I wrote a short story for Karen Joy Fowler's week. There was Cherry Girl and Cook and this Bluebeard guy who kept his previous wife's bodies in the back room. There were no ghosts.
Hmm.
And Karen Joy Fowler gave me very good feedback, but she also said, I want to know more about Cook. Tell me more about Cook. There's something there. And what was there was actually a novel, it turned out. Yeah.
That's so interesting, though. If you haven't read Sour Cherry yet, there are ghosts, kind of almost a chorus of ghosts in a sense, that are really like they're so core to the book. So it's so interesting to hear that they were kind of an evolution rather than
Mm,
right there at the start. But that actually leads me into my next question, which was about the initial inspiration. Because I feel like that's such a perennial question with writers. I always want to know where they get their ideas so that I can get them that way too, because it takes me forever to come up with ideas. So I'm curious, like you said you wanted to work with a Bluebeard retelling. You knew that right away with that short story. But what about the story spoke to you? Did it evolve in how you were approaching the retelling aspect as you worked with a whole book? Does that make sense?
yeah. Yeah, it definitely makes sense. So I mean, as I said, I knew I wanted to tell a story about domestic violence and cycles of abuse. And the Bluebeard, I went to a French school, so I was familiar with the Perrault tale, and it just lent itself to that kind of story because he's a serial wife killer, right? But there was also this additional speculative element that's never quite explained sufficiently in the original story. The Bluebeard, what is that about? And that allowed me to ask questions I had about violent men and violent people more generally. Like, is it natural? Is it unnatural? Do they have a choice? And then that also allowed me to ask more complex questions like, do they have agency? And are they the only ones who are culpable? What about the rest of us? What about the class system that created this man? What about the patriarchy that gave him his power? What about the social structures that enable him? So it became this vehicle to ask all these complex questions I wanted to ask, and also the fairy tale frame kind of functioned as a distancing mechanism, a kind of plausible deniability for the narrator, because she is telling a very harsh story to a child, right, and a very true story. So it kind of allowed me put some distance between that reality and the fairy tale, because it can't possibly be a real story, because it's about this man who literally rots the world, right? It can't possibly be her story. And in that way, it became a method almost to say something that is truer through the lies of the fairy tale. That's a very cruel story through the merciful device of the fairy tale.
I love what you said about like, wait, why is his beard blue? We need to circle back to that because it's just one of those things that I don't think I would have really thought about it. But when you do, it can crack the whole thing open and be like, if I'm asking that question, why not just do kind of whatever I want inside of this frame? We're going to come back to the fairy tale stuff, but I'm going to stay in order because otherwise I'll forget everything that I want to ask. Okay. But I'm curious about how your short fiction background, but also you have a PhD in media and cultural studies. Am I?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And that's just such a mix of like form and ways of thinking, and you like writing games. That's a whole other set of muscles and a whole other way to think about story is in such a active way. And I'm curious about whether you kind of felt those influences as you worked, or maybe it's the kind of thing where you kind of turn around and look at the book you finished and go like, oh, that's where all of that is. But I want to know how those kind of ingredients mix together for you.
Yeah. So in interactive fiction, the kind of interactive fiction I wrote was very long, and it definitely taught me how to write longer. If I hadn't written those games, I think I would never be able to write a novel. And how it works, without boring everybody with details, basically what happens is the main character is the reader, and every few hundred words you give readers a set of options, and they have a choice to make that influences everything that happens afterwards. And it can be something they do or how they feel towards things, what they say, things like that. So at every point in the story, I had to consider all the different ways the story could go, and all the different ways readers with different personality traits would react to the different things that happened in the story. So I definitely took that with me when I was writing a novel. I had to consider all the different ways the story could go, and then what I saw as my task was to kind of map the reader's journey through the narrative while keeping in mind and in sight that all the phantom versions of the story that didn't happen. But I wanted them to be present. I wanted them to be, almost visible as alternative ways the story could go. The PhD, I have tried to put it behind me. I finished in 2015, so it's been a good 10 years. But I think it definitely influences everything I do, because it has shaped the way I think, the way I view the world, the discursive nature of reality, how I approach representation, and all of these things. And from media and cultural studies, the main thing I took is that there is no unmediated version of the world. Like everything is already mediated at least twice, one through our senses. Like we cannot experience the world directly. It's already filtered through our senses, and then we make a representation of that experience to ourselves and to others, and that representation necessarily happens in context, historical and cultural context. So it invites questions of who represents whom, as what, to whom, for what purpose, on what occasion. So of course, how could I write a Bluebeard retelling without asking questions about agency and responsibility? With that's the frame through which I view everything, basically.
So really simple is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah.
Super simple, very easy. We ask one question and then we're done. I'm gonna combine these because we've talked about the fairy tale a little bit, and you just said kind of there being a frame through which you see things, which I'm going to go with frame. But there's just a lot of kind of hints or ghosts of other forms or texts or genres in a way in Sour Cherry. We have the fairy tale frame, like the very first sentence. This is not a fairy tale. Wait, oh my God, what if that's not it?
No, it is.
It's setting up an expectation that very clearly for the reader, but those elements are at play. And then you have references or kind of hints at other myths. And there's a little wine dark sea in there for everybody who has read their Homer. And even the epigraph is from a libretto from an opera, which is also a narrative, but a totally different way of thinking about story. And I just wanted to know kind of the intention with that. Or did it kind of happen organically, or what kind of tool is that for you when you think about putting together a novel?
I think partly did happen organically. I'll explain why, but it was also intentional. I think within the narrative, what the narrator does is pull into the story all these different other stories as a way, almost as a distraction, almost as a look over there. When things get too hard, she just conjures a different kind of story. But for me, creatively, when I was writing this novel, I was reading Matt Bell's Refuse to be Done, and there he references that idea of every good novel offering some kind of incomprehensible abundance, and that really resonated with me, and I kind of leaned into it and wanted to pull into the book everything that excited me. And that's intertextuality, right? And for me, intertextuality is not just a device. It's the mechanism that powers creativity for me. So for me, Bluebeard is not just a Perrault tale. It's Bartok and music. It's Pina Bausch and dance theater. And from that, I got all the different. My theatrical background came into the mix as well. So we got tragedy, obviously, the Wine Dark Sea. We got Shakespeare in there, Heiner Miller, all sorts of different things, and that's the way my brain works, I think. And I do think that thinking is dialogic, and for me, writing is a technology for thinking. So the book itself became dialogic in more ways than one. Like I love that it was created from the beginning as a call and response with Karen Joy Fowler, right? It was tell me more, so here's a book. But also within the story is basically dialogic as well. You have a narrator that addresses her child, and as a form, it's also dialogic with all these other influences that come into the mix. Does it make sense?
Yeah, and I think it also kind of connects with what you were saying earlier about using the fairy tale as a distancing mechanism, and that sometimes when it gets really, really rough to be so close to it, you have these references that kind of add in another layer of familiarity or story that helps soften it a little bit, which makes so much sense, especially when there is a very specific addressee for the book. Like there is the audience, the reader, but there's also the child who's being told about all this. I think it's so cool how you balanced speaking to the child and the reader and not always saying the same thing, which is so tricky, but I thought it was so well done.
Thank you.
I also want to talk about names in Sour Cherry because some characters are named, but a significant number of them aren't, or they're called like by their role. So cook, you mentioned, or there's a shopkeeper, or rather just shopkeeper. And so I wanted to know kind of, were there any characters who you named and then unnamed? What was the decision-making process there? What kind of role do you see those names having, and what effect were you trying to create?
Yeah, there are, I think, two answers to this question. One is intentional and about craft and what I wanted the names to do, and the other one is probably psychological. We'll start with the craft one first. So I do think names have power. They reveal, they obscure, they allow you to command. You can almost um, interpolate someone in the performative sense. I name you Natalia, and therefore Natalia you are. What defines us to an extent. So I think the only named characters in the book are Agnes, the wet nurse who raises him, and Eunice, his first wife. And I think these are the only people who meet this person when he is very young. So before he kind of grows up to view people as means to an end, as tools, as their functions. So at one point, Agnes even loses her name, but at one point, everyone around him becomes their functions. There is cook, there is shopkeeper, and that is a fairy tale thing as well. It's I remember Kate Bernheimer's essay on fairy tales saying that the flatness of characters in fairy tales allows a depth of response in the reader, and that's partly what I was trying to go for, as well as I usually shy away from any idea of universality because I don't think this is possible, but I do think that when people are named after their roles, like woodcutter, king, queen, shopkeeper, that does allow a certain degree of the story being anywhere, at any time, or everywhere and all the time, which is the point I was trying to make about domestic violence. So that's the well thought out answer. The other one, I do wonder. I don't know. Some of the things that happen in my work are not entirely intentional, but this one has been sticking with me for a long time, and I do wonder if the naming thing is a trans thing. I am trans, and I have burned through a bunch of names at this point. Natalia is not the name I use in my everyday life, even though it was the name given to me by my parents. And I do have lots of other trans friends who have similar relationships with their names. So I do wonder if some trans people have a much looser connection to their names. Like it doesn't feel as close to the skin, maybe. And the reason I'm saying that that has been happening to me for a long time is that I often wrote short stories with unnamed main characters, and everybody found it really difficult to connect to these characters, and that completely baffled me. I had no idea why they needed to know people's names. So I really don't know. I need to work this out with my therapist, probably.
I think some of the most successful stuff is that combination of craft and then the unconscious, just like, I don't know, I just like it. So I think that's a perfect answer. I'm looking at the time, and before we go on, we still have time. But if you do have a question, or if one comes up at all from the audience, please feel free to put it in the chat whenever it occurs to you. I just want to make sure that if we've got a lot of questions, that I can leave a little more time and that kind of thing. So, we've talked about names, and I did want to just pause or take a little detour to talk about the title, because I think, especially right now, I don't know if other people have noticed this, but the cherry and like the shade of cherry red is having like a moment. It's a very trendy color, but I feel like the fruit itself is also very like aestheticized and very like it has a lot of kind of pop culture beauty connotations that I don't know if everybody understands the same way. So I'm just curious kind of where the title came from for you and what it brings to mind for you. And if you could talk a little bit, without getting like too spoilery or anything, about kind of the role it plays in the larger work.
Yeah, the title actually came from my wonderful agent, but the image itself of the sour cherry and the cherry trees, I only realized this when you asked the question, actually. The connotations it has for me come from childhood. Both my grandparents had cherry trees in their backyards, and one grandparent used to make sour cherry drink. We gathered the sour cherries and put them in a bottle with sugar, and you had to turn it every few days. You left it in the sun, and then you got this really thick, syrupy thing that you diluted with water, and it was sweet and amazing. So it was kind of a treat, I guess. But I also, with my cousin, we used to climb my other grandparents' tree, and we played shopkeeper. Actually, I don't remember what we sold, but we played shopkeeper, and we used different sized leaves from that cherry tree as currency, like different denominations. So apparently it has that connotation of wealth as well. For me, wealth and pleasure, and something you give children to lure them or reward them, which is all very in line with what's happening around the cherries in the story. And yeah, thank you so much for that question. I didn't remember any of that.
That's actually my grandparents in Greece had a cherry tree in their yard, and we would have visinada and play in the cherry tree. So I was like, oh, that's what it is for me. I wonder if it's the same. So a huge part of what I think people have responded to with the book, and I mean, what the bookseller who hand sold it to me today responded to about the book, is the prose and your particular voice within your prose. And I wondered, like, is there an element that you feel is the most important when you're building a sentence, or are there like particular influences that you feel like that, this person really shaped the voice that I use? Or can you talk a little bit about how you kind of arrived at it? That's a very broad question, but I just want to know everything. So
yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's a very hard question for me because I really don't know. What I do know is that I need to have a clear idea of the voice before I can start writing. But the way I know that I have a clear idea of the voice is that I'm ready to start writing.
Yeah.
And I'm not superstitious about many things, but that's one of the things that I don't really want to look too hard at or poke or analyze, because I'm scared that if I figure out how the trick is done, it will stop working and I will never be able to do it again. But voice is definitely very, very important. And influences, again, we go back to intersexuality. It's a lot of theater, European theater, a lot of Greek poetry, a lot of Ritsos and Cavafy and Cavadias. Yeah, so many. I really don't know.
That's okay. We can keep going. We won't look too hard at it. It's great. It's whatever it is working.
Just let it do its thing.
I'm the same way though. Like if it's ready, then I'll know that it's ready. But if it's not, there's no reason for it. It's just not ready.
The problem with that is that you can't really replicate it. So I know it when it happens, when it happens. I know it when I see it, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And then I forget that I will know it when it happens, and I get really stressed about it. And I'm like, it's never going to work again.
Yeah. Again,
it's rough.
Therapist work.
Exactly. We mentioned this a little bit, but you said something in an interview with Big Echo that I thought was really interesting. And this isn't the full quote. The full one is, I think, touches on some other stuff that we already talked about as well. But you said there's no difference between our version of the world and the genres through which we describe it. And I just thought genre was that just made me think about it a lot. Because when we think about a genre, there are so many expectations for a reader that come along with it. And I wondered how you felt, or how it was balancing any expectations that a reader might have with Sour Cherry, because there are so many kind of elements of other genres like brushing up against it in a way. Like there's fairy tale, but there's also like literary fiction, which is a genre. And there's kind of, I think it plays with kind of the cultural obsession with true crime a little bit as well. So there's a lot to grapple with there. And I wondered how that felt and what that was like.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really good question. And thank you for reading the interview. Um, it's gonna be my PhD talking again.
Perfect.
This is again about, for me, realism being a genre.
Yeah.
There's this wonderful Fisk quote that says, "Objectivity is the unauthored voice of the bourgeoisie," which basically, to me, means that if you are claiming objectivity, you're simply hiding your ideological position. And that, to me, because there is no unmediated reality, as I was saying before, for me, the medium comes with inbuilt form, structure, presuppositions about what the world is like and what the world looks like and works like, and this is basically genre, and that to me trickles down all the way to book publishing and reader expectations. And when I'm writing, genre is in my mind a marketing category, not a creative category. Um, unless what I'm trying to do is subvert reader expectations,
Yeah.
or act as if I want to subvert reader expectations and then not do it. Um, but there are, yeah, the cultural fascination that you talked about with serial killers was
Mhm.
also very, very important to me, because we do have these genres, and I don't see literary genres and everything else, the way we interact with the world, as separate things, because these, like, tropes like villain origin stories,
Mhm.
or strong women who overcome unbelievable amounts of abuse to become survivors. Um, all these stories come with a certain degree of triumphalism,
Mhm.
and to me, that feels constricting when it comes to things like domestic abuse, for example, because what it does, when that genre is so familiar and when that trope is so familiar, when we do come across real situations of domestic violence and abuse, then and the person doesn't triumph,
Mhm.
because the statistics say that, a lot of people don't leave their abusive relationships, and I think it takes an average of 8 attempts to leave an abusive partner. So when we do come across these people, it's really easy to reach for that trope and go, well, why aren't you surviving? Why aren't you triumphing? Why didn't you just leave?
Mhm.
And that's what I had in mind when I was going into the story.
Yeah, I think it can be very hard to resist kind of the flattening of story
Mm,
that these things can do, genre or trope. And there are obviously ways to work with them that don't do that, but the impulse
yeah.
is really there.
Mm,
We're almost at the time where I'm gonna look for audience questions, but just a couple more before then. Um, what is your writing process like these days? Is there anything that you're like really finding inspiring, or any trick you have that I can use that will work? Help.
Uh, I wish I did. I think the problem with writing novels is that it teaches you how to write that novel
Yeah.
and nothing else. I just finished drafting another novel, and that was also.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We'll see if anybody likes it. My agent who's here. Um, that was also based on a shorter thing. So I did use some of the same approaches to structure, like
Mm,
realizing that there is so much space in the novel, and it's okay to try different ways into the novel,
mm,
which was really helpful. But um, obviously, it's different. Again, I think this one is much more conscious of its structures and its devices. And I'm also finding that very inspiring. It's about memory and how we represent things. So very relevant to what we were talking about earlier as well. So I'm very into neuroscience of memory, anything that has meta-theatrical elements, that kind of thing. And personal and cultural histories and historiography, how that relates to national identity, personal identity. None of that is useful as tips to write anything.
But that sounds really exciting, and I'm sure I'm not alone in looking forward to seeing that on shelves someday. So,
thank you. I think basically what I'm trying to say, the process is fill my head with everything I can find and then hope for the best. Yeah.
I've heard some writers kind of talk about that as like being like a magpie or a collector, and they just like gather things that look cool and then hope that they fit together. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, definitely magpie.
If people pick up Sour Cherry and they really liked it, is there anything that you would recommend that we turn to next, or anything that you think goes really well with Sour Cherry as like a media pairing?
Media, yes, definitely Pina Bausch, especially her Blaubart. I used to listen to a lot of Tarquinio Merula, who is a Baroque composer. It goes really well with Sour Cherry. Bergman, Cries and Whispers. Theater, Strindberg's Ghost Sonata. Blood Wedding, Federico Garcia Lorca. Yeah, I'm very bad at thinking of book titles when I'm asked this question.
No, don't worry, you are not alone.
Yeah.
But that's great. That's a whole like playlist that you can listen to while you're reading. We have like 10, 15-ish minutes left. So if people have questions they want to put in the chat. Oh, wonderful. I see some already. Hold on. Let me find. Yes, okay. Tanya, I also never wondered why his beard was blue. It just never occurred to me. So Becky was wondering, do you have a favorite scene or part of the book that you can tell us about without spoiling anything, just in case?
Oh, God.
I know it's hard.
I don't know. One of the weird wives, I think, the ones who don't have names. At one point in the book, things get really, really weird, and that's where that's my vibe. That's my niche, I think.
I love stuff like that, so I agree. I think those are great. Do you have a favorite fairy tale other than Bluebeard? But anything else that really stands out in the canon?
Oh, that's a really good question. You see, my fairy tale references are very Greek, and there are some very weird fairy tales in Greek. There is one of my favorites is about these two stars who have children, and one of the stars starts eating the children. It's just bizarre, but yeah, it's very Greek, and I love it. Yeah. The Greek cannibal star fairy tale.
So everybody can check that out as well with the playlist.
All my obscure references.
No, that's amazing. Everybody's going to take away something new, which is wonderful. This is
not Cinderella, Danya.
Who would you choose as a collaborator? Your past self, your future self, an ancestor, or an ancient Greek tragedy actor? Those are some very weighty options to consider.
Yeah. Definitely not my past self. Too messed up. Future self, who knows? What were the other options?
The other ones you have an ancestor or an ancient Greek tragedy actor?
I think the last one. I think an ancient Greek tragedy actor, because nobody knows what they were up to, and we have all these theories about what they did on stage and how they approached their craft, but really we have no idea. So yeah, that I think that would be really, really fun.
I agree. I think that's the best one. A question from Becky. The novel comes out in the US and UK at the same time. So I think, is the UK tomorrow? Or you're today, actually? Or
No, it came out on Tuesday.
oh, on Tuesday.
Yeah.
I don't know why I had a Friday in my head. Anyway,
What
have
is
you noticed any differences in how it's being promoted or received in those different markets? And I also think, to add on, I think it's so interesting writing a book and then seeing it kind of put through the marketing machine, like the pasta machine, but it's marketing, and being like, oh, I didn't think that part was important, or like, I didn't think we would talk about it this way. And has there been anything like that for you that you've noticed or been surprised by?
Yeah, it has been really educational, the whole experience. I think the main difference in how we approached the book in the US versus the UK was that in the UK, I think the publisher leaned much more into the fantasy aspect of the book, whereas in the US, it sits more between the lines of speculative fiction and literary fiction, and the covers also reflect that, I think. So
Yeah.
it seems to me that it appeals to very different sections of the market in the UK than it does in the US. I don't know yet how that will translate to reviews or what people think about it, because, well, like you were saying before, the reader expectations going in do color things. So I'm curious to see how someone who expects a fantasy novel reads this book versus somebody who expects a literary, weird, with speculative elements novel. I'm really curious to see that. Yeah, fine.
I think we talked about this a little bit, but I think this kind of connects to what you were just saying. Mallory asks, I haven't read the book yet, but from the combo, it sounds like it combines a few different genres very well. It does. Was it difficult to find a balance between them all? And I think, going off that, like, did you find that you had to kind of adjust the percentages of different things, or were there maybe wives whose stories were more longer or more prominent that you kind of scaled back? Were there any changes like that you ended up having to make?
Not in terms of genre balancing, I don't think, because I don't think in those terms when I
Sure.
write, when I draft the book, or when I'm editing. I think my compass is more what feels right for the story at any given point, and I only worry about genres later when I have to pitch it to someone, or explain to people what they're going to find in the book, which might be why it's so difficult to find where it belongs in the market. But that's the kind of work I like to read as well. So yeah. So
Yeah.
no, it's the answer. I don't even think I can do that. That I could if I wanted to.
I think it'd be a very particular skill to be able to just
A very good skill.
adjust. Yeah, I'm like,
Yeah.
I want to learn it one day.
Like turn this one up, turn this one
Exactly.
down, have the perfect balance for everyone. Would be
Oh,
great.
we can dream. Um, I will say, how about last call for any questions? I can't tell if anyone is typing, so I'll just hang on a minute. Otherwise, I think oh, nope, that's my screen just being a little funky. I think we're coming up on time, so I think I just thank you so much for chatting with us. I can speak for everybody, I'm sure, when I say, like, this is so great, and I loved getting to hear your thought process and kind of unpack the layers of everything. Really, if you haven't read the book, I think it's amazing. I think you should go out and amend that, pick up a copy as soon as you can. Zach, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to pop the link for the book back in the chat window one more time. So please, to reiterate, if you can get a copy of the book from your local independent bookseller or from the links from the Tin House website, please do. And then also please come back and check out our future programming. We'd love, love, love to see you again. Natalia, Rory, this has been an absolute pleasure. I'm glad I got to be an audience member for an event. It's nice to sit back and watch one. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.